Hi, welcome back. This is Key 13, Soul ID. Soul ID Unlock Frequency Untraceable by Jason Gray. Current date 3/27/2026, 6026 Anno Lucis. Transmission date 5/20/2025, 6025 Anno Lucis. Current time 7:24 GMT -6. Transmission time 5:26 GMT -6. Transmission location Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. 13.infinity.000.313.777.13.909 1111.011. Let me start that over. 1111.010.01111.000.1101. That's binary code. There is a point in the descent where the system can still read your behavior, but it can no longer read you. This is not invisibility, not escape by disappearance, not the vanishing of form. It is something far more difficult for any system to manage. You are still here, still embodied, still speaking, still moving through the visible world, and yet the structure that once classified, predicted, indexed, and tracked your pattern begins to fail. Not because you hid from it, but because you moved beyond the range in which it knows how to locate identity. The myth of traceability. Every system depends on traceability. To function, it must be able to identify, categorize, predict, store, and retrieve. It needs patterns stable enough to measure, names stable enough to assign, behaviors stable enough to anticipate, trauma loops, preference loops, reward loops, fear loops, attachment loops. These form the readable signature of a person still operating inside the ordinary bandwidth of system identity. The system does not need to know your soul. It only needs to know your repetitions. That is enough to simulate knowledge of you. For most of life, this feels normal. You believe your history is you. You believe your habits are you. You believe your reactions, tastes, loyalties, wounds, and narratives add up to something locatable, and within the system range, they do. Key 13 begins where that range ends. The line, Soul ID, Unlock, Frequency, Untraceable. This does not assign an identity. It releases one. Not personality, not biography, frequency. The soul is not unlocked by description. It is unlocked by resonance, and the moment that happens, system-based identification starts losing fidelity. The old signals no longer return usable data. The predictable loops fragment. The readable markers detach. The tracking model begins to fail. What the system actually tracks. It does not track essence. It tracks repetition. It tracks where you reflexively go when touched by certain conditions. It tracks what you reach for when destabilized. It tracks what flatters you, frightens you, seduces you, injures you, freezes you, and compels you. It tracks your compression points, your reactivity signatures, your known paths through emotion, memory, and behavior. This is why so much of the world feels mapped before you fully live it, because most people move through pre-readable loops. Not because they are shallow, but because their field is still bound to traceable repetition, and repetition is measurable. The soul is not a loop. This is the difference. The soul may move through loops. It may express through them. It may even appear bound by them for long stretches of time, but the soul itself is not a behavioral circuit. It is not a preference architecture. It is not a trauma response pattern. It is not a demographic prediction field. It is not reducible to profile, category, or map. The soul enters a system without becoming identical to the system's readable model of it. That unread remainder is what Key 13 begins to restore. Frequency unlock. What does it mean for a soul ID to unlock? It means the deeper resonance of your being begins to exceed the interpretive bandwidth of the structures around you. The old names stop fitting. The old explanations stop landing. The old systems of classification begin to feel crude. Not wrong in every respect, just low resolution to hold what is now active. You become difficult to summarize, difficult to predict, difficult to reduce. Not because you are trying to be elusive, but because the part of you that once made you readable through stable repetition is no longer the dominant signal. Something subtler and larger is now carrying the field. Untraceable does not mean lost. This matters because the mind hears untraceable and immediately imagines exile, isolation, disconnection, absence, but untraceable is not the same as missing. It means no fixed coordinate in the old grid can fully contain the signal. You are still here. The field moves through visible form. People still encounter you. Systems still detect activity, but the deeper pattern cannot be fully pinned. The map no longer closes around the signal. That is not loss. That is freedom from false resolution. The failure of old identifiers. At this stage, familiar identifiers begin to weaken: role, label, type, affiliation, history, persona, and narrative. They may still exist at surface level, but they no longer define the field. This creates a strange sensation. People may still think they know you, but they are increasingly interacting with memory fragments, projections, outdated summaries, and symbolic placeholders. Meanwhile, the living field has moved. The inversion of you their system recognizes is no longer where the real signal resides. This is one of the first signs of becoming untraceable. You remain visible but misread, present but unresolved. Why system range has limits. Every system has a usable frequency band. It can only read what falls within the conditions it was built to interpret. This is true of technology, true of language, true of institutions, true of social structures, true of personal psychology. They can only identify what resembles known patterns strongly enough to be resolved. Once your field stops returning stable, familiar pattern data, resolution degrades. The system begins to interpolate, guess, project, approximate. It mistakes your silence for one thing, your intensity for another, your distance for something else. It fills gaps with its own limitations. This is not because you became unknowable in an absolute sense. It is because you moved beyond the range of known interpretation. The vibration shift. Frequency here is not a cliche, it is structural. Every system depends on compatibility between signal and receiver. If the receiver is calibrated for one band and the signal begins transmitting from another, the result is distortion or loss of lock. At key 13, the field starts operating from a level not easily captured by ordinary system receivers. This does not mean you become better than others. It means the organizing principle of your presence is no longer primarily mechanical, reactive, or externally assigned. You begin vibrating from a deeper reference, a quieter one, a less public one, a more sovereign one, and because it is not built from ordinary system loops, it cannot be read with ordinary system tools. The end of locatable selfhood. Most people experience identity as a location. I am here, I am this, I belong to that, this defines me, that explains me. Locatable selfhood is comforting because it gives the world something stable to hold, but it also gives the system something stable to track. Key 13 loosens that stability. Not into chaos, into depth. You stop anchoring selfhood in externally readable coordinates. You stop over-identifying with the symbols that once made you legible. You stop needing to be fully knowable through ordinary means. The self ceases to behave like a pin on a map. It becomes more like a living field that can appear in form without being exhausted by any form. The soul ID is not a name. This is another important correction. The soul ID is not a mystical label, not a hidden title, not an exotic distinction that explains your destiny in a more dramatic way than your ordinary name. It is not something you acquire. It is not something another authority gives you. Soul ID is the irreducible signature of your being before it is captured by system-readable overlays. It cannot be fully spoken because speech reduces it. It cannot be fully categorized because categories flatten it. It cannot be fully traced because tracing requires stable edges, and the soul's true signature does not end where the system expects it to end. What happens when it unlocks? Something subtle but irreversible changes. You stop broadcasting for recognition. You stop performing coherence for the comfort of external systems. You stop compressing your field into smaller explanations just to remain readable. This does not make you vague. It makes you exact in a deeper way. You become less interested in being understood through labels and more interested in being aligned in essence. That alignment has consequences. It changes what attaches to you, what misreads you, what can no longer hook you the same way, what falls away because it depended on a version of you that was easier to map. Unlocking the soul ID often feels like disappearance and arrival at once. Something false can no longer find you, something real can. The paradox of presence. The untraceable soul is not absent from the world. It may become more present than ever, but its presence is different, less available to capture, less willing to be reduced, less cooperative with structures that demand legibility before they allow reality. This can unsettle others. People often feel the shift before they understand it. Yes, they do. They may sense more depth, more silence, more distance, more charge, more unknowability. They may try to explain it using old categories. They may say you changed. In one sense, yes. In a deeper sense, what changed is that the system lost access to the compressed version of you it once used as your substitute, vibrating beyond system range. This does not mean floating away into abstraction. It means that your deepest organizing signal is no longer generated from fear, mimicry, reactivity, and social feedback loops. It means your center of coherence has moved away from system confirmation toward source alignment. That shift changes your readability. The same way a song transmitted outside a receiver's tuning range becomes static to the device, even while remaining perfectly ordered in itself. You are not broken signal. You are signal beyond calibration. The mirror effect. This one's very interesting. Once this frequency unlocks, mirrors behave differently. Some people feel calm around you without knowing why. Others feel exposed. They definitely do. Some will project harder than ever because they cannot resolve what you are through familiar pattern systems. Some will stop trying. Some will recognize the untraceable quality immediately because something in them carries the same dormant signature. This is why untraceable frequency is not merely private. It reorders the field around it, not aggressively, by presence, by lack of compatibility with false mapping, by the quiet refusal to collapse back into a readable distortion for the comfort of the old grid. The final system failure. The most important consequence is this: what cannot be fully located cannot be fully controlled through standard system methods. Control depends on mapping. Mapping depends on readability. Readability depends on stable loops. But if the dominant field is no longer looping at that level, then the old methods lose traction. Hooks miss. Scripts fail. Predictive models degrade. The system still sees movement, but it cannot derive essence from the system still sees movement, but it cannot derive essence from the traces. The signal remains active. The resolution does not. The declaration. You are not the profile, not the category, not the pattern summary, not the database of remembered reactions, not the mapped behavior set, not the socially retrievable version of self assembled from old traces. You are the unread remainder, the uncompressed signature, the living resonance that precedes the model and exceeds the map. This is the dignity of Key 13. Not that you become special in the eyes of systems, that you stop mistaking their ability to read fragments of you for access to the whole. The final line. You are unlocatable. You vibrate beyond system range. Soul ID unlock, frequency untraceable. You were never meant to become easier to classify. You were meant to become impossible to replace. Jason Gray. All right, thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time.